Section 3 of Little Journeys to the Homes of English Authors. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Little Journeys to the Homes of English Authors by Elbert Hubbard. Section 3. Robert Browning, Part 1. So take and use thy work, amend what flaws may lurk, what strain of the stuff, what warpings past the aim. My times be in thy hand, perfect the cup as planned. Let age approve of youth, and death complete the same. Rabbi Ben Ezra. If ever there lived a poet to whom the best minds pour out libations, it is Robert Browning. We think of him as dwelling on high Olympus. We read his lines by the light of dim candles. We quote him in sonorous monotone at twilight, when soft-sounding organ chants come to us mellow and sweet. Browning's poems form a lover's litany to that elect few who hold that the true mating of a man and a woman is the marriage of the mind. And thrice blessed was Browning in that fate allowed him to live his philosophy, to work his poetry up into life, and then again to transmute life and love into art. Fate was kind. Success came his way so slowly that he was never subjected to the fierce, dazzling searchlight of publicity. His recognition in youth was limited to a few obscure friends and neighbours, and when distance divided him from these, they forgot him. So there seems a hiatus in his history, when for a score of years literary England dimly remembered someone by the name of Browning, but could not just place him. About the year 1868, the author of Sordello was induced to appear at an evening of uncut leaves at the house of a nobleman at the West End, London. James Russell Lowell was present, and was congratulated by a lady sitting next to him on the fact that Browning was an American. "But only by adoption," answered the gracious Lowell. "Yes," said the lady, "I believe his father was an Englishman, so you Americans cannot have all the credit. But surely he shows the Negro or Indian blood of his mother. Very clever, isn't he? So very clever." Browning's swarthy complexion and the fine poise of the man, the entire absence of nerves, as often shown in the savage, seemed to carry out the idea that his was a peculiar pedigree. In his youth, when his hair was as black as the raven's wing, and coarse as a horse-tail, and his complexion mahogany, the report that he was a Creole found ready credence. And so did this gossip of mixed parentage follow him, that Mrs. Sutherland Orr, in her biography, takes an entire chapter to prove that in Robert Browning's veins there flowed neither Indian nor Negro blood. Dr. Furnivall, however, explains that Browning's grandmother on his father's side came from the West Indies, that nothing is known of her family history, and that she was a Creole. And beyond this, the fact is stated that Robert Browning was quite pleased when he used to be taken for a Jew, a conclusion made plausible by his complexion, hair, and features. In its dead serious hero-worshipping attitude, the Life of Robert Browning by Mrs. Orr deserves to rank with Weems' Life of Washington. It is the brief of an attorney for the defence. Little Willie anecdotes appear on every page. And thus do we behold the tendency to make Browning something more than a man, and therefore something less. Possibly women are given to this sort of thing more than men. I am not sure. But this I know: every young woman regards her lover as a distinct and peculiar personage, different from all others, as if this were a virtue, the only one of his kind. Later, if fate is kind, she learns that her own experience is not unique. We all easily fit into a type, and each is but a representative of his class. Robert Browning sprang from a line of clerks and small merchants, but as indemnity for the lack of a family scutcheon, we are told that his uncle, Reuben Browning, was a sure enough poet. For once, in an idle hour, he threw off a little thing for an inscription to be placed on a presentation ink bottle, and Disraeli, seeing it, declared, "Nothing like this has ever before been written." Beyond doubt Disraeli made the statement. It bears his earmark. It will be remembered that the Earl of Beaconsfield had a stock form for acknowledging receipt of the many books sent to him by aspiring authors. It ran something like this: "The Earl of Beaconsfield begs to thank the gifted author of for a copy of his book, and gives the hearty assurance that he will waste no time in reading the volume." And further, the fact is set forth with unction that Robert Browning was entrusted with a latchkey early in life, and that he always gave his mother a good night kiss. He gave the good night kiss willy-nilly. If she had retired when he came home, he used the trusty latchkey and went to her room to imprint on her lips the good night kiss. He did this, the biographer would have us believe, to convince the good mother that his breath was what it should be, and he awakened her so she would know the hour was seasonable. In many manufactories there is an electric apparatus wherewith every employee registers when he arrives by turning a key or pushing a button. Robert Browning always fearlessly registered as soon as he got home, this according to Mrs. Orr. Unfortunately or otherwise, there is a little scattered information that makes us believe that Robert Browning's mother was not so fearful of her son's conduct, nor suspicious as to his breath, as to lie awake nights and keep tab on his hours. The world has never denied that Robert Browning was entrusted with a latchkey, and it cares little if occasionally early in life he fumbled for the keyhole. And my conception of his character is such that when in the few instances Aurora, rosy goddess of the morn, marked his homecoming with chrome red in the eastern sky, he did not search the sleeping rooms for his mother to apprise her of the hour. In one place Mrs. Orr avers, in a voice hushed with emotion, that Browning carefully read all of Johnson's dictionary as a fit preparation for a literary career. Without any attempt to deny that the perusal of a dictionary is fit preparation for a literary career, I yet fear me that the learned biographer, in a warm anxiety to prove the man exceeding studious and very virtuous, has tipped a bit to t'other side. She has apotheosized her subject, and in an attempt to portray him as a peculiar person set apart, has well nigh given us a being without hands, feet, eyes, ears, organs, dimensions, passions. But after a careful study of the data, various visits to the places where he lived in England, trips to Casa Guidi, views from Casa Guidi windows, a journey to Palazzo Rezzonico at Venice, where he died, and many a pious pilgrimage to Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey, where he sleeps, I am constrained to believe that Robert Browning was made from the same kind of clay as the rest of us. He was human. He was splendidly human. Browning's father was a bank clerk, and Robert Browning III, author of Paracelsus, could have secured his father's place in the Bank of England if he had had ambitions, and the fact that he had not was a source of silent sorrow to the father, even to the day of his death in 1866. Robert Browning, the grandfather, entered the bank as an errand boy, and rose by slow stages to principal of the stockroom. He served the bank full half a century, and saved from his salary a goodly competence. This money, tightly and rightly invested, passed to his son. The son never secured the complete favour of his employers that the father had known, but he added to his weekly stipend by what a writer terms legitimate perquisites. This, being literally interpreted, means that he purchased paper, pens, and sealing wax for the use of the bank, and charged the goods in at his own price, doubtless with the consent of his superior, with whom he divided profits. He could have parodied the remark of Fletcher of Saltoun, and said, "Let me supply the perquisite requisites, and I care not who makes the laws." So he grew rich, moderately rich, and lived simply and comfortably up at Camberwell, with only one besetting dissipation. He was a book collector, and had learned more Greek than Robert III was to acquire. He searched bookstalls on his way to the city in the morning, and lay in wait for first editions on the way home at night. When he had a holiday, he went in search of a book. He sneaked books into the house, and declared to his admonishing wife the next week that he had always owned them, or that they were presented to him. The funds his father had left him, his salary, and the perquisites made a goodly income, but he always complained of poverty. He was secretly hoarding sums so as to secure certain books. The shelves grew until they reached the ceiling, and then bookcases invaded the dining room. The collector didn't trust his wife with the household purchasing. No bank clerk ever does. And all the pennies were needed for books. The good wife, having nothing else to do, grew anaemic, had neuralgia, and lapsed into a shut-in, wearing a pale blue wrapper, and reclining on a couch around which were piled mountain-high books. The pale invalid used to imagine that the great cases were swaying and dancing a minuet, and she fully expected the tomes would all come a-toppling down and smother her, and she didn't care much if they would, but they never did. She was the mother of 2 children, the boy Robert born the year after her marriage, and in a little over another year a daughter came, and this closed the family record. The invalid mother was a woman of fine feeling and much poetic insight. She didn't talk as much about books as her husband did, but I think she knew the good ones better. The mother and son moused in books together, and Mrs. Orr is surely right in her suggestion that this love of mother and son took upon itself the nature of a passion. The love of Robert Browning for Elizabeth Barrett was a revival and a renewal in many ways of the condition of tenderness and sympathy that existed between Browning and his mother. There certainly was a strange and marked resemblance in the characters of Elizabeth Barrett and the mother of Robert Browning, and to many this fully accounts for the instant affection that Browning felt toward the occupant of the darkened room when first they met. The book collector took much pride in his boy, and used to take him on book-hunting excursions, and sometimes to the bank, on which occasions he would tell the beefeaters how this was Robert Browning III, and all 3 of the R.B.'s were loyal servants of the bank, and the beefeaters would rest their staves on the stone floor, and smile 15th-century grimaces at the boy from under their cocked hats. Robert III was a healthy, rollicking lad, with power plus and a deal of destructiveness in his nature. But destructiveness in a youngster is only energy not yet properly directed, just as dirt is useful matter in the wrong place. To keep the boy out of mischief, he was sent to a sort of kindergarten kept by a spinster around the corner. The spinster devoted rather more attention to the Browning boy than to her other pupils. She had to keep him out of mischief, and soon the boy was quite the head scholar, and they tell us that he was so much more clever than any of the other scholars that, to appease the rising jealousy of the parents of the other pupils, the diplomatic spinster requested that the boy be removed from her school. All this according to the earnest biographer. The facts are that the boy had so much energy and restless ambition, was so full of brimming curiosity, mischief, and imagination, introducing turtles, bats, and mice on various occasions, that he led the whole school a merry chase, and wore the nerves of the ancient maiden to a frazzle. He had to go. After this he studied at home with his mother. His father laid out a schedule, and it was lived up to for about a week. Then a private tutor was tried, but soon this plan was abandoned, and a system of reading, best described as natural selection, was followed. The boy was 14, and his sister was 12 past. These are the ages when children often experience a change of heart, as all revivalists know. Robert Browning was swinging off towards atheism. He grew melancholy, irritable, and wrote stanzas of sentimental verse. He showed this verse, high-sounding, stilted, bold, and bilious, to his mother, and then to his father, and finally to Lizzie Flower. A word about Lizzie Flower. She was 9 years older than Robert Browning, and she had a mind that was gracious and full of high aspiration. She loved books, art, music, and all harmony made its appeal to her, and not in vain. She wrote verses, and very sensibly kept them locked in her work-box, and then she painted in water-colours and worked in worsted. A thoroughly good woman, she was far above the average in character, with a half minor key in her voice and a tinge of the heartbroken in her composition, caused no one just knew how. Probably a certain young curate at St. Margaret's could have thrown light on this point, but he married, took on a double chin, moved away to a fat living, and never told. No woman is ever wise or good until destiny has subdued her by grinding her fondest hopes into the dust. Lizzie Flower was wise and good. She gave singing lessons to the Browning children. She taught Master Robert Browning to draw. She read to him some of her verses that were in the sewing-table drawer, and her sister Sarah Flower, 2 years older, afterwards Sarah Flower Adams, read aloud to them a hymn she had just written, called "Nearer, my God, to Thee." Then soon Master Robert showed the Flower girls some of the verses he had written. Robert liked Lizzie Flower first rate, and told his mother so. A young woman never cares anything for an unlicked cub 9 years younger than herself, unless fate has played pitch and toss with her heart's true love, and then the tendrils of the affections being ruthlessly lacerated and uprooted, they cling to the first object that presents itself. Lizzie Flower was a wallflower. That is to say, she had early in life rid herself of the admiration of many by refusing to supply an unlimited amount of small talk. In feature she was as plain as George Eliot. A boy is plastic, and even a modest wallflower can woo him, but a man for her inspires awe. With him she takes no liberties, and the wallflower woos the youth unwittingly, thinking the while she is only using her influence the better to instruct him. It is fortunate for a boy escaping adolescence to be educated and loved, the words are synonymous, by a good woman. Indeed, the youngster who has not violently loved a woman old enough to be his mother has dropped something out of his life that he will have to go back and pick up in another incarnation. I said Robert liked Lizzie Flower first rate, and she declared that he was the brightest and most receptive pupil she had ever had. He was 17, she was 26. They read Shelley, Keats, and Byron aloud, and together passed through the Byronic period. They became violently atheistic, and at the same time decidedly religious, things that seem paradoxical but are not. They adopted a vegetable diet, and for 2 years they eschewed meat. They worshipped in the woods, feeling that the groves were God's first temples, and sitting at the gnarled roots of some great oak, they would read aloud by turn from Queen Mab. On one such excursion out across Hampstead Heath they lost their copy of Shelley in the leaves, and a wit has told us that it sprouted, and as a result, the flower and fruit, we have Browning's poem of Pauline. And this must be so, for Robert and Miss Flower, he always called her Miss Flower, but she called him Robert, made many an excursion in search of the book, yet they never found it. Robert, now being 18, a man grown, not large but very strong and wiry, his father made arrangements for him to take a minor clerkship in the bank, but the boy rebelled. He was going to be an artist or a poet or something like that. The father argued that a man could be a poet and still work in a bank. The salary was handy, and there was no money in poetry. In fact, he himself was a poet, as his father had been before him. To be a bank clerk and at the same time a poet, what nobler ambition! The young man was still stubborn. He was feeling discontented with his environment. He was cramped, cabined, cribbed, confined. He wanted to get out of the world of petty plodding and away from the silly round of conventions, out into the world of art, or else of barbarism, he didn't care which. The latter way opened first, and a bit of wordy warfare with his father on the subject of idleness sent him off to a gipsy camp at Epsom Downs. How long he lived with the vagabonds we do not know, but his swarthy skin and his skill as a boxer and wrestler recommended him to the ragged gentry, and they received him as a brother. It is probable that a week of pure vagabondia cured him of the idea that civilization is a disease, for he came back home, made a bonfire of his attire, and after a vigorous tubbing was clothed in his right mind. Groggy studies in French under a private tutor followed, and then came a term as a special student in Greek at London University. To be nearer the school, he took lodgings in Gower Street, but within a week a slight rough-house incident occurred that crippled most of the furniture in his room and deprived the stair-rail of its spindles. R. Browning II, bank clerk, paid the damages, and R. Browning III, aged 20, came back home, formally notifying all parties concerned that he had chosen a career. It was poetry. He would woo the divine goddess, no matter who opposed. There now! His mother was delighted. His father gave reluctant consent, declaring that any course in life was better than vacillation, and Miss Flower, who probably had sown the dragon's teeth, assumed a look of surprise, but gave it as her opinion that Robert Browning would yet be Poet Laureate of England. End of Section 3, Part 1.